Imagine waking up to find that your personal wealth, your savings, and your property had become illegal. This is what happened in the United States in 1933. Banks were collapsing, unemployment was soaring, and the economy is spiraling downward. In response, President Franklin D. Roosevelt implements a bold, controversial policy. Executive Order 6102, signed by Roosevelt on April 5, 1933. The order mandated that Americans surrender their privately held gold to the Federal Reserve. The reasoning behind this directive was to combat gold hoarding, prevent bank runs, and provide the government with the flexibility to devalue the dollar, steps deemed necessary to halt the deflationary spiral and stabilize the economy. However, for ordinary citizens, this policy was an assault on their basic freedoms. The government not only demanded that citizens hand over their gold, but also set harsh penalties for noncompliance. Fines could reach $10,000, or about $250,000 in today's terms, and violators faced up to 10 years in prison. This wasn't just economic policy. It was an exercise in government overreach that raised serious constitutional questions. Take the Fourth Amendment, for instance, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. How could a policy mandating the confiscation of private property align with this constitutional safeguard? Then there's the Fifth Amendment, which guarantees protection against self-incrimination and the right to due process. Yet, under Executive Order 6102, Americans were compelled to disclose their gold holdings or risk severe penalties, effectively stripping them of these protections. These constitutional tensions set the stage for a legal showdown. That showdown came in the form of Norman versus Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Co. At the center of the case was a bond issued by the railroad company held by George Norman. The bond included a gold clause, a common provision in financial contracts of the time that required payments to be made in gold or its equivalent value. For Norman, this clause meant he was entitled to $38.10, based on the gold standard of 1930. However, after the dollar was devalued, the company paid him just $22.50 in the new currency's face value. Believing this violated the terms of the contract, Norman sued. The case reached the Supreme Court, where it became a pivotal moment in legal and economic history of the United States. In a narrow 5-4 decision, the court upheld the Joint Resolution of 1933, which nullified gold clauses in contracts. Writing for the majority, Chief Justice Charles Evans Hughes argued that the gold clauses were not truly about payments in gold as a commodity, but rather payments in money. The court emphasized Congress's broad powers to regulate currency, particularly in times of crisis, and declared that nullifying gold clauses was a necessary step to stabilize the economy. For the federal government, this ruling was a victory that validated its sweeping economic policies. It prevented financial chaos by ensuring that contracts could be paid in devalued dollars, preserving the government's ability to manage the economy during the Great Depression. But for individuals like Norman, the decision represented a loss, a breach of contract sanctity, and a diminishment of personal wealth. The implications of this decision extended far beyond the 1930s. Critics argue that it set a dangerous precedent, granting the government power to override private contracts and property rights under the guise of economic necessity. Supporters, however, contend that such measures were crucial to preventing a total collapse of the financial system. This case also underscores the broader consequences of Roosevelt's gold policy. Once the government collected the nation's gold, it raised the official price of gold from $20.67 to $35 per ounce, effectively devaluing the dollar by more than 40%. This move bolstered the government's gold reserves and increased its purchasing power internationally, but it came at the expense of the citizens whose savings were effectively devalued overnight. The legacy of Norman versus Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Co. continues to resonate. It's a cautionary tale about the balance between government power and individual freedoms, and it invites us to reflect on the trade-offs between economic stability and the sanctity of contracts. In modern times, debates around government intervention in monetary policy, whether related to inflation, cryptocurrencies, or economic emergencies, often invoke comparisons to this landmark case. Ultimately, this story reminds us of the fragility of the economic and legal systems during times of crisis, and the enduring questions about how much power the government should wield in the name of stability.